Hey, little sister, what have you done? No, 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 no. Hey, little sister, who's the only one? Hey, little sister, who's your dungeon master? Hey, little... What? Wait a minute. That starts to take on a different...
Yeah.
No.
Different dungeon.
It's a nice day for a disorganized play. It's a nice day to game again. Oh, come on.
Shamala.
Take me back homeland.
Okay, that's enough.
That's as much as we can do. Otherwise, we get cease and desisted. We get blacklisted. We get punished by everyone who tuned in. Hey everyone, welcome everyone who tuned in. It is time for Disorganized Play. I am your co-host and Dungeon Master, Tom Lommel. This is my co-host and all-star fearless leader, Dom Zook.
Hey.
Every Thursday we get together and talk about what happened. Every Wednesday that we get together and play a game that we call Dungeons & Dragons that we planned every Tuesday and got together and talked about how cool it was going to be. And then the players totally screw that up for us. Not in an uncool way, just in a differently cool way, as was evidenced last night. So, welcome to the show. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Spread the word on the social medias that we're live. Contribute to our considerable cyber reach. That kind of got a little bit of Janice from the Muppets there. Hey, groovy, okay, considerable cyber reach, everybody. Wow, like, wow. Watch, indeed, Black Dragon 8K. Watch how the TPK unfolds naturally. I'm glad.
We have Black Dragon 8K and A Harvey 2K. Who says hello.
A Harvey 2K. A Harvey 2K. I'm squinting because I can't really. There's a little glare on the monitor that we have in the studio. I don't know. So now I'm your cool DM, Billy Joel. Hey, so today we're going to talk about some highlights from last night. We're going to talk about a little concept that you saw put into practice yesterday called micro-leveling. That's right here. We are going to talk about how it went, condensing combat, because that was something that we talked about on the show on Tuesday. And then finally, we're going to talk about the plot, the party, and the puzzle pieces, and how they all interact together, right? So before I poison the well with my thoughts on what the highlights were last night, Dom, were there any standout moments for you that we were like, this was, well, Modern Chow, thank you so much for kicking in with a little tip. Appreciate that so much.
Tom will indulge any relevant musical selection.
Not anyone, but most. I will try most, or contort most.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
Okay, what did I, let's see.
Was there a highlight for you from last night's session?
Well, kicking Grayson.
Kicking Grayson down into the tank.
Yeah, that
was definitely.
I also liked the 4 Vegapygmies pretending to be an adult, trying to go see an R-rated movie and getting their asses handed to them by the party.
I thought that was just Brian wants me to sing "Single Ladies" for $10.
You gotta go. If you want the dance, it's got to be at least 20.
Disorganized Play is really turning into a different kind of request show.
This is the Tom
Who
Cam
needs our
show.
DM advice?
Tom Cam shows.
That's
not
okay.
What anyone wants.
Listen, I work in the world of professional television commercials. I have no shame or humility. Let's be honest, right? So, that was the Shambler surprise was something that was unlocked by chat, which I thought was that was fun, right? I thought that was it.
Yeah.
I didn't mean it to be like, I knew it came off as kind of like a goofy, like guys in a raincoat, like 3 kids in a raincoat kind of thing. I didn't mean it to be like that, but I thought it was cool, the idea of like you hit one of these monsters hard enough and it literally breaks into its component pieces that all then, potentially could have like scurried around and attacked or run off or something like that. I liked the idea that we see so often in video games of you get to a certain point in the battle and then the monster changes.
Yeah.
Right. So that was the idea behind that. Although, like you say, all of the stuff that I had planned last night was very, intended to be fairly sincere and serious and kind of like straight on dungeoneering, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the combination of how you decide to present it, and then the combination of what the mood at the table is and how the players decide to interact with it.
Yeah.
That just changes it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's why they say, you know, the DM's best laid plans will always be thwarted by the players as soon as they encounter them. So there's no direction you can go really that won't get changed by how the players will interact with them.
Right. And so maybe this is kind of getting ahead of one of our topics, because one of the last things I wanted to talk about was like what you had planned and then how the players kind of like jimmy it, right?
Yeah.
But I think the game last night did not go at all like I had planned. And the players really did some things that I thought were stupid. Right? Like on its face, like everything that happened last night was sort of stupid. Like from a why would you logically do this? Like, are these sound strategy and tactics? The answer is no. Like, talk to the weird bunny demon wolf thing, right? And yet they had a great time. Right? I felt like they were genuinely enjoying what was going on at the table. Yes, they were a little weirded out by the wolf thing. I kind of had to talk them into that. Right. But like this whole comedy of errors where they kick Grayson down into the tank with the froggy moth, and then he actually swims up from the depths and starts eating the paladin. It might have been on its face stupid, but it was stupid fun. And they managed to get out of it.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's, and we'll pick that back up later in the show, but I think that's an important point to take away is when you said, what tripped me off there is, like you said, the DM's plans were thwarted. And I think that's true, but it implies a level of failure that is not actually necessarily reflected in the session. Yes, my plans for the session were thwarted, but we still had a great time, and we still, got to the place where, at least got to a place where we needed to go. It wasn't necessarily a huge step forward, but it wasn't a step backwards. And then I don't think they ended the session feeling like, oh, we're lost, we don't know where to go next, we don't have motivation or whatever. I felt like it was a very positive session all the way around, despite the fact that, like, literally at the end of it, I go, page 2. Like, I thought they were going to get to the research lab way earlier.
Sure.
I don't know why I thought that. Probably because I'm a terrible DM who thinks that the players are going to act logically, and that's not. That's not the case, right? Oh, it makes sense that they would do this. No, the shiny object, the little squirrel runs across the path, and then we're off on an adventure.
I think that's rule number 1. The players never act logically.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hard part, right? Is like, as a DM, you're trying to create a world and a set of circumstances and a story structure and a mystery and a plot that fits together logically, that is plausible and has motivation of this is why this guy is doing this, right? And then you inject the players into it, and the players really, they aren't rewarded for figuring it out. They're just rewarded for fighting their way through it, whichever way they kind of cleave, right? It's almost like cutting a steak, right? Yes, there's a way to cut a steak that it's very easy and delicious to chew, or you can just massacre it and you'll just be chomping. To the players, I got steak. They don't care if they butcher it or they cleanly slice it and it's delicious, and they wipe their lips with a napkin at the end of it, right? So, yes, as Faquad points out, I am only a level 3 GM. Maybe one day I will ascend to the ranks of a level 4 Dungeon Master. How many XP is that?
We can put in an application.
I don't know. I mean, the good news is, no matter how badly you chop up the adventure, you're still a level 3 GM at the end of the campaign, right? So, so that's my micro leveling. Oh, Brian's full of sauce today. I see how it is. All right. So for me, a couple of highlights. Yeah, definitely I actually personally enjoyed the moments where where he's in the suit right? And the suit just starts doing stuff, so the lights come on or the air comes on, and like I actually like that moment of kind of like the technology has this almost like animus and personality of its own. So that's fun. I thought that was a fun moment last night. It was a little bit of a struggle to get them to talk to the wolf. I had a moment, I had a flash of inspiration where when they invoked the avatar of Basharla, instead of another Ava showing up, another tree stump just up out of the ground, and then a rabbit came up and was like, "Hey, hi, what's going on?" I was this close to doing that.
Yeah, that was. I was surprised because when we were talking on Tuesday, we were like, "Well, I think we've missed our chance with the wolf in sheep's clothing."
Yeah.
And then when you started directing them towards it again, I was all like, "What? How is he doing this?" And I mean, I was surprised that the players were still like, "Yeah, okay, we'll go check out a bunny." Like, you did a good job of making that seem enticing.
I think Megan honestly was the driver of that, where she's like, "Look at how cute it is. You have to go talk to it." And Havana was like, "I was on board until it winked at me."
Yeah.
And Ava was like, "Let's go talk to it anyhow."
Yeah.
So I think she really like kind of pushed the party over to inspect it.
Yeah. And I even said in chat, I was like, oh, nice job, Tom, because I was like, how are you gonna, like, we can't have another set piece combat in this thing. How is this gonna? Oh,
right, yeah,
got it.
That's
okay,
how that's how it fit in.
Yeah,
I was glad that got unlocked by chat for a couple of different reasons that we're going to talk about. But yeah, I think I could have been better off. Part of what was interesting about that particular moment was basically everyone at the table was like, "Oh, this is a horrible monster that's going to attack us." Right? As Black Dragon 8K points out, when has a cute bunny ever been something safe to approach, right? In any kind of fiction.
Right.
And so I was a little bit like, on the one hand, I was like, oh, they know the shtick on this encounter, which is a little disappointing. But on the other hand, I also knew this encounter is not going to go the way that they think. So I'm glad that, or I'm not glad, but I'm like relieved that they were on to the spoiler of, oh, well, it's just some sort of weird monster and it's going to like suddenly rise up and there's nothing good can come of this. And I was like, well, actually, you're wrong about that.
Yeah. I was surprised they made it that far because I know that Gaurav wanted to just shoot the bunny. And
that was the part where I was afraid they were going to just take it out at range.
Right. And they had previously with the Shamblers and stuff, rather than that was one of the surprising moments for me was the jumping from 50 feet up to attack these Shamblers who were just moving towards him, not really doing anything.
Yeah, I was surprised that they didn't find a way to either stop the platform or whatever and just like missile fire down and.
Yeah.
But again, as the DM, you're like, what are the sound tactics? And as the players, you're just kind of in the mood for like, whatever. I got to get down there and fight those guys. This is not a group that thinks about tactics.
Right.
AY Pop makes a great point that I want to get to before it scrolls off of our screen here. They say, it's hard to set up an environment where players are rewarded for paying attention instead of being exhausted by doing so. And I think that's a really insightful comment, right? Is that
Gold star.
Yeah, when D&D really is a game, role-playing games in general, but D&D especially, no, all role-playing games, are games that require you to pay attention and get invested. And maybe in a mystery investigation type of thing, you're rewarded for putting those puzzle pieces together, but generally, like, it's very intensive, and it doesn't necessarily pay off until like several sessions later, even in a regular like let's explore the dungeon type of style of game.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's it. I don't think that can be understated, or I don't think it can be overstated. Like what a valuable commodity your players' attention is, and why they start acting weird when. At the table when they just start doing stuff that doesn't make any sense, and it's a big part of it is like either their attention is wandering, or they're just kind of like burned out, or they're distracted by something else that's going on in their real life or whatever, right? RPGs are a game that revolve around participation and absorption of information and then responding to that information. And it's a lot. There's a lot of brain power being put into that situation, and that's what makes it different, more rewarding, but also different from watching a movie or whatever. Is like if you kind of tune out, it doesn't matter with the movie, right? You aren't being asked every 5 minutes which way should this movie go.
Right. Yeah.
In most cases.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, those were some great moments. I was a little bit surprised that they got into the core complex thing, and everyone, to a person in the party, decided, let's go up the stairs back towards the island. I was like, you could see the island from, the bridge where you were literally just standing up until you got kicked in the water. I guess, why do you think more interesting things are up? I don't know, but that's they literally went to the most boring parts of the thing. They got in the elevator and went to the most boring parts of the thing first. I will point out, somebody made a comment in chat like, oh, is this the express elevator to hell? And I'm like, that did not get unlocked. Yeah. That's a separate thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole point of this session was to get them into the research lab and start giving them the tools to solve all of the various health problems that the different people in the party and outside the party or adjacent to the party have. And I thought that was going to be, we just heard a nice snore from Harold. Let's see. Oh, yeah.
Checking in.
He's checked in. It's not actually as dark as it looks on the screen in here, but we don't have a light on Harold, so. All right, so let's move on to our next topic, I would say. It was, like I said, all around, I felt like it was an enjoyable session surprisingly for me and for the players. Micro leveling. So we saw last night, chat unlocked something. I don't use strict experience because I don't really believe in it. I don't like the dungeon accounting aspect of tracking XP. Somebody always has a different number written down. Somebody always misses a session and they go, oh, wait a minute. No, you weren't here for that fight where we killed the Bone Devils. Therefore, you actually don't have, it is way too much finicky math for me. It just is not an interesting system that I like to track. And so I've just taken the liberty of going milestone promotion. When the story feels right, it's time to give the players a reward, right? And if we don't want to give them a reward in the form of treasure or gold or magic items or whatever, let's give them a reward of level up to the next thing. And players respond to that. That's the key driving kind of motivator for the basic Skinner box type of push the monster button and XP pellets fall out and then I level up and I'm sated, right? So that risk reward kind of thing. But I felt like it had been so long since we leveled up that I needed to give the players just a little kind of juice, right? And part of it was, and I think they were kind of a little bit lost in the plot, right? I think they felt like there's so many different parts, there's so many different people who are afflicted with something, there's so many different keys that we need that we don't really know where to take them or what to do with them. I think the game had become a little bit overwhelming in some respects, right? In terms of what was going on and the clarity of their motivation and their plan and whatnot. And I was like, let's kind of give them a little piece of candy and then also give them a little kind of refreshed confidence and capability to go forward towards the end of the story. And then at the end of the story, maybe we'll do another level up session or something like that. That would seem like it'd be a natural place for them to level up, is either right before the boss battle or at the end of the boss battle, at the end of that, that arc of the adventure, right?
Sure, yeah.
So this is a technique that I decided to employ, which is not particularly, I don't think it's super innovative, but I think you have to be kind of careful with it. But it's the idea of just basically micro leveling them, right? So instead of giving them all of their abilities in one kind of fell swoop and having them pick from a whole bunch of menu of options, last night what we saw was I gave them specific gifts that juice their characters just a little bit. It's almost like the equivalent of giving them a special, like, rare magic item or whatever. But it's got limited uses, but it's still cool. But it was tailored specifically to each of their characters, so it was a nice reward for each of those characters. And it really, I think it made everyone feel like special and reinvested in their character a little bit, right? Whereas, you could feel the game's, like, the motivation for the game kind of like flagging a little bit in terms of, like, I'm not sure what the plot is, and it just seems to be go to the next place. And so to get them reinvested in that, we had those gifts. Now, some of it was a simple, like, I'm going to emulate a class ability, like Grayson's, he gained an extra channel divinity. Is it game breaking? I mean, if you did several of them in a row, sure, but for him to have one extra one, no. And I think he uses that ability, and I think he's going to think it's cool, right? Likewise, like, Havana loves being mobile and getting all over the battlefield. So, in her case and in Gaurav's case, it was like, let's mirror a spell-like ability, right? So she burns her reaction, she can teleport to wherever she puts the knife within 120 feet. Is it cool? Yes. Is it game-breaking? Not really. No, she likes to be able to bop around the battlefield. I didn't want to buff her already insane stealth skills, so, like, I'm not going to give her, like, a ring of invisibility or that's some sort of power like that.
Yeah, she's OP still.
It's already, the math is too much. Likewise with Gaurav, like, he basically has access to a spell that's not on his spell list, right? He's on a Harvey. Oh, Aaron, good to see you. Yeah, thanks for dropping in. He basically, he has access to a mirror image spell, which would not normally be on his spell list. Once per day, he can do that. All right, cool. So, and then with Ava, like, I wanted to do something, like, with her connection to her goddess and whatnot, and her transforming into water seemed like very kind of on point for who she is and her function in the story and whatnot. So they're not necessarily huge gifts, right? But I could see, I've seen stuff like this before. Like, I think Monty Cook came up with a way to have, like, a magic weapon that was like your signature weapon, and it would incrementally level up, right? So you'd essentially invest XP or whatever into your sword, and it would gradually gain more and more abilities, but not, like, at a crazy rate, right?
Sure.
It would just be this little, like, okay, and this level I did a little bit of this, and then this level I did a little bit of that. And by the time you added it all up, you're like, oh, now this is a really kick-ass sword.
Right.
It's that same sort of approach here, where I wanted to feed them some candy, but I wasn't prepared to hand out more items. Here's the problem with items is players often reject them or don't see how it ties into their character. So, for instance, if I gave them a ring of mirror image, there's no guarantee that Gaurav would be like, oh yeah, I totally want that. In fact, it's more likely that Grayson would go, I'm in combat all the time. It would be nice if I could have something that would, keep bolstering my defensive abilities or whatever. I'd like that. Yeah. The next thing you know, you hand out items that do this stuff, and even though you meant it for 4 different players at the table, it ends up that one of the players has, like, 2 or 3 of them, and one of them is like, I didn't really want it. I don't know. It didn't seem cool to me. And then not only does one player be like, oh wow, well, I have all this stuff. This is nice. But you have one player who's like, why don't you think of something cooler for me? And that's the tricky part about giving these types of rewards as item-based rewards is they can't, that they will sometimes mix and match or trade them around, or decide to, like, gild the lily on somebody, like, with the example that I just gave. They might decide, well, let's really buff this dude up to like a max combat monster. And the next thing you know, you've unintentionally made a character who's way too powered when he meant to kind of spread it around.
Yeah.
For instance, if we had some sort of magic ring of protection type of thing, you look at the situation and you go, Ava's armor class is garbage. It's 12. We really need to do something about that. How about a ring of protection? And then somehow Grayson's character social engineers it, so he goes, well, I tell you what, why don't you take my X, Y, and Z, you know, my mace, my helm of disruption or whatever, and you can use that against undead, and I'll take the ring, and all of a sudden his armor class goes from like 20 to like 23 or something like that. Thanks, Kitsy. Thanks for dropping in.
Yeah.
So yeah, power creep. I mean, players naturally min-max. I think a lot of groups do, at least the groups that I have played with. And so this idea of the divine gifts was a way to give them just an incremental piece of power, a little bit of both character power and morale boost, without having to go through a whole negotiation of whose stuff was what would suit whom best, da 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 da.
I think another way, or I think a way to avoid the sort of trading of those abilities and items and stuff like that is kind of how you did it last night, though. Is giving them a purpose, right?
Right.
You kind of when you were giving them their things, you sort of tailored it to them and gave it a reason for, you know, okay, well, you have the ability to turn into a water elemental because of this, you know,
right.
or you have the ability to teleport, or you have the ability to do mirror image because of this. Like, then you give them a almost a backstory and a purpose for that power that makes them go, oh, I see. Yeah, I could use this mirror image thing. I see why that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
Like,
even though I don't think that Thawne having a mirror image power is necessarily was top of his list of like nice things to have.
Yeah.
But it's almost like we were talking about taxes. It's almost getting like a $50 tax refund where it's not enough to change your life, but you're like, oh, what could I spend $50 on that would make me happy?
Yeah.
You know,
right.
what's kind of on my not on my gotta have list, not even necessarily on my wish list, but like kind of the unexpected surprise list of like, oh, okay. And it's having as a DM having that moment of like taking a holistic view of their character and going, what could I just plug in that would be like an interesting way to complement that character's abilities, not necessarily not enhance what they're already really good at, but finding an interesting complement to what they're actually missing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, without bringing the whole thing out of balance.
Yeah.
So, that's that. I felt like that was effective, and I think you could consider structuring a whole campaign around breaking up the stuff in the player's handbook and going, okay, well, now you gain a feat, but you don't gain any hit points or whatever, you know. Or maybe like giving them, one of the issues with that is like, then all of the player's progression is sort of in the DM's hands,
right?
Which is dangerous. Players love kind of like looking at the options and trying to pick between them and trying to decide. And then when they finally decide, hopefully they're happy with it, although there's certain players who never are. But what you could also do is create some sort of system where it's like, here are the menu options for your character, and one of the things is that you can pick from. So here's like 2 or 3 things that you can pick from, but one of them would be like hit points, right? Yeah. So it's like you can either, as you micro level over the next 3 micro levels, you can either gain a feat or get some hit points. You can either gain a spell ability, gain a spell-like ability, or gain this like extra boost to your armor class. You can either gain some hit points or gain, and that way they're sort of choosing what they want. And if they decide to take the stuff that keeps buffing their character out with abilities, then they might start falling behind on the hit point track, right? So you could entice them into creating a balanced character that doesn't necessarily have a ton of abilities, but is a much hardier character.
Sure.
Or
Has
they
more
could
utility.
they could be more of a utility player, but they're also weaker. They're more of a glass cannon kind of thing, right? I think there's an idea there. I don't have it particularly well fleshed out, but I just bring this up as a way to create awareness around when you're doing milestone type of experience. I tend to stretch my milestones way out. Now, in the DMG, they always say like, oh, you're supposed to have an average of 14 encounters and then level up, right? In my experience, like players want those like they don't think of it as 14 encounters. It gets to be like 8 encounters, and they're like, are we leveling up? What's where are we at? What's going on?
Well, and especially if it was like a particularly difficult fight, you know, you want more out of that. You know, you're like, oh well, we almost died.
We just killed the whatever it was.
Yeah, like those werewolves were tough, man.
And it also doesn't necessarily really like consider the idea of if they do find a way to short circuit the plot and they kill, you know, the second in command right out of the gate, who's supposed to be a really big bad dude, but they found a way to like get, you know, leverage over the guy and they defeated him. They feel like they've done this big fight and it's a major accomplishment. And you're like, well, okay, but you still have to go through 3 more encounters before you have enough XP to level up.
Right. Yeah.
But so this would be a way to moderate that whole feeling of, well, because we haven't solved the DM story fast enough, we can't level up. So let's, you know, and now he's withholding the goodies from us because we're not playing his game the way he thought we would. So it's something to consider. There are some things you have to be careful of when you're deploying this sort of thing. But last night really was, you know, this idea of the gifts that were tailored to each of the characters. That was an instance of what I would call micro leveling, and I thought it was very successful. I thought they were skeptical of the way that it was delivered. They did not want to talk to the wolf in sheep's clothing, and they did not want to trust it.
Right.
But then they got the abilities, and I think they were genuinely happy that they had that interaction.
Yeah.
There was that moment where Havana was like, why is this even happening? Like, did chat unlock this? I'm like, yes, they did. So, let's move on to our next topic, condensing combat. We talked on Tuesday about some ideas about condensing combat. I think my goal was to have a 3-round combat. We did, I think, end up having a 3-round combat with the Froggy Moth. That ended, I think, at the top of round 3. Maybe there was one round where they were just sort of like closing with the thing, but the Shambler combat went 4 rounds, something like that. Went slightly longer, which was fine. Like it was an interesting experiment with trying to keep those combats kind of tight, tidy, but still dramatic and interesting. Estel Castillo chimes in on XP here with the comment, in my home game I tied milestone leveling to threat escalations. The PCs always knew that they were leveling because they had been through some serious stuff, and now the dangers are only going to be tougher. Yeah, I wonder if you couldn't actually like reverse the presentation of that and go, okay, you're leveling up before the big boss fight rather than you're leveling up after the big boss fight. So that like you kind of posit the notion that often comes up in chat here when we have a bunch of things unlocked, where the table goes, what are we fighting? Because we were getting a lot of goodies right now. We're getting front-loaded with a lot of advantages. Right. And I wonder if you couldn't turn that around a little bit and have that same sort of dynamic happening at your home table with these little milestone kind of leveling things. And even you could do it at with handing out, you know, healing potions or you know, especially potions at expendable magic items. You could have that kind of thing happen where it's like, oh, you happened upon this cache of, and then everybody from a metagame standpoint goes, whoa, okay, all right, okay. Well, we found a scroll of fire resistance, huh? Yep. We found a arrow of slaying devils. Yep.
So water elemental fight coming up?
All right, okay. So we're gonna be possessed by a ghost. So I thought generally there were some. I thought combat wasn't necessarily quite as. I didn't hit my 3-round goal as much as I wanted to, but I was very cognizant last night of keeping an eye on how do we wrap this up quickly? How do we get out of this combat? We've introduced the situation, we've introduced the obstacle, we've presented a challenge both with the terrain and with the enemies that they're facing. How do we now like get out of this as quickly as possible? And you know, the trick is to take advantage of the things that are offered to you, but then also create some advantages for yourself, right? So the idea that once they took 45 points of damage or so, they bust into pieces and they decide to run off. You know, that was a variant of the idea of the NPC wants to live and they decide to flee early,
Sure.
right? And the good news is those shamblers, they don't have any information that the party needs, right? And they didn't need to be rounded up and captured or whatever. They could present a threat later on, but for the most part, it was just an example of how the environment itself is dangerous and hostile to them. So that was one thing that I was trying to monitor, like when does the monster decide to stop fighting, and look for early opportunities for that to happen. When they actually were fighting the Froghemoth, I was thinking to myself, well, all right, so at some point, something's got to happen here where he gets distracted or called off or decides to retreat. You know. Now, unfortunately, the way things were going for Grayson, it was probably going to be after he had had one solid meal. But I was thinking of ways like, could there be something in the environment, an alarm that goes off, a noise that happens, some other thing, some other sort of intervention that happens that makes him run away, right?
Yeah.
Now that would be really interesting, right? You know, it's almost like that Jurassic Park thing of like, you know, the siren goes off and all the dinosaurs are like, oh, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
So I thought that it was fairly successful last night. You know, the flip side of it was they were enjoying the hijinks that they had gotten themselves into. So I had to give those combats a little bit of room to breathe because they had gotten themselves into trouble. I was talking to, were we talking about this before the show? Yeah, I guess we were. So the difference last night, we had two big combats, really, right? And I didn't expect to have two big combats. We had three and a half scenes. So we had the Shambler combat, we had the encounter with the Prophet of Kasharla, and we had the Froghemoth debacle, and then we had them explore the island tank tube complex thing, right? And I didn't expect to have that giant Froghemoth battle that took time. One of the reasons I think that it was a successful session is that the players had gotten themselves into this predicament, that it was a player-driven set of circumstances that they had decided to do something dumb and sort of thoughtless, and they realized, oh, we were doing a goof, and now we have to pay the price for accidentally stumbling into this hostile monster of the dark kind of thing, right?
Right.
Versus more of a DM facing kind of combat where, well, we're going to go explore this island and there's probably going to be monsters guarding it, and there's no way that we can avoid or mitigate that sort of circumstance. That's just something that the DM is going to either thrust upon us or not. We don't really have any very much control in the realm of the system. If it says in the adventure, there's skeletons in this room, those frickin' skeletons are probably going to attack us, right?
Yeah.
And so then it feels like something that they just have to kind of slog through because it's there and the DM is beholden to the adventure. Whereas in last night, getting wrapped up with the sea monster was definitely a case of we got ourselves into this trouble, we've got to find a way to fight our way out. So, it has not yet been explained why Basharla is pronounced differently each time. One of the reasons that has been posited is that Basharla is the goddess of the sea, and so she is ever changing and she goes by many different names because she doesn't have a fixed form, as it were. That's one of the theories that's been floated. Painful. So I think the things that we saw last night, you know, like I think they, from my end of the DM screen, they worked. Mm-hmm. Were they as tightly effective as I wanted them to be? Was it a 3-round combat? No, they did get lucky with that sleep grenade. Like that was an incredible stroke of the dice because he's got a +9 saving, you know, throw bonus, so he missed literally by 1. But you know, we also discussed on Tuesday, like, are you going to use the stats as they're presented in Volo's guide? And I was like, yep, and I did, and wow, that, you know, that really made them sit up and pay attention.
Yeah, it was fun when you know, like Grayson's like, okay, I got it, and like takes and then it's like it just did 48 points of damage or whatever, and he was just like, okay.
I mean, part of it too was he had been fighting the Shamblers and they had hit him a couple times or whatever.
Yeah.
And he wasn't terribly dinged up from that, but yeah, it was just a prank. It was just a prank.
Just did it as a goof.
So I think, you know, I think the techniques that we talked about on Tuesday actually did work here. I did also I looked at the monster's hit points and I said, that's beginning to end. That's when they would die. But at what point into this thing do they start running, right? Mm-hmm. And so with the Shambling Mountains, yeah, they had 136 hit points or whatever. But I'm like, after 45, the state is going to change. Something is going to shift about these monsters. And in this case, because I knew there wasn't much else to be revealed through this combat, I was like, that's when they bust apart and they run away, right? I mean, that was certainly the option that was unlocked, was the Shamblers have all of these different abilities that are not standard Shambler abilities. Mm-hmm. So I liked the idea of them like basically taking pieces of themselves and throwing them at the party, and they turn into these weird twig blade kind of things. Like, I thought that was, it fulfilled two functions, right? One, it was evocative. It was very flavorful for that monster to have these weird vampiric seedlings, right? It really provided a new dimension. If you knew what a Shambling Mound was, you're like, wow, oh, okay, no, that's definitely different than like a regular Shambling Mound. So that kind of like takes you back on your heels and makes you reevaluate what you think your tactics are going to be for the situation. But then secondly, just giving those monsters a ranged attack was huge and turned it from, okay, we're going to spend 3 rounds trying to get to the monster so that we can hand-to-hand combat them, back to let's get into the actual conflict of exchanging damage right away. Mm-hmm. And let's give the party, if they're not ranged fighters, let's give them more of a motivation to get down there and get into it, as opposed to like, stop the platform, pew, 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 dead.
Yeah.
That's that. So, yeah, I thought it was, to me, the best part that played out last night was the changing circumstance for the monster. I thought that was big. Yeah. Also, you got to look for those opportunities where, like Havana was, I want to basically try and intimidate these things. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. We'll make a check, and then it's got to work to some degree, right? There were 4 creatures on the battlefield at that point opposing the party with, you know, probably 500 hit points between all of them. Let's take some assets off the table, and if she wants to make a stand and get a good roll on her intimidation, let's reward that with an effect that's meaningful, right? It's far more meaningful at the end of the session for her to say, yeah, and then I scared off half of those guys just by like looking like a badass, mm-hmm. as opposed to, and then 5 rounds later we managed to finally kill the last of them. Like that's not as interesting of a trophy story to take home with you. All right. So we've talked a little bit about this, but let's kind of tackle the meat of it, which is the plot, the party, and the puzzle pieces, right? So I honestly probably did more prep for last night's session than I have done for Expedition to the Barrier Peaks up until this point, right? Certainly I've put a lot of different work in a lot of different things, but the advantage to running with Schrodinger's clues, where things are a little bit amorphous, they find this owl thing and they don't know what it is, and it can fulfill a variety of plot functions within your story, right? That's the advantage, is it's very fluid and very dynamic. The disadvantage is you can sometimes find yourself dancing around what the answers are if you're not sure, if you haven't decided, okay, well, what is exactly either the backstory or how this is supposed to play out or whatever, right? But we're now deep enough into the story. I like setting things up and letting the players kind of like shift and take the story in different places so that it's a combination of my ideas are right and their ideas play in, and then we shift and turn and create an idea together that's just a little bit more interesting than what they came up with, right? But at some point, that dance sort of has to like become narrower in scope. At the beginning of an adventure, you can give a bunch of different hooks and premises for what's essentially at play, what the plot is, what the dynamics of the plot might be. And then as they kind of bite into things, you go, yep, let's start following that plot line, and we'll kind of like cut that one away, right? But you give them a lot of leeway to kind of chase all over the board wherever they want to go. Now that we're in the final 4 episodes, last night was the fourth of our last 4 episodes, or the first of our last 4, whatever you want to describe it. You need to give that agency that they have needs to kind of like start collapsing, where you're still open to adapting ideas that they have chummed out at you, but you really need to start defining things that are amorphous plot elements, that are Schrodinger's clues, into concrete actual facts of what the things are, right? And that's the danger of this whole improv method, is that you never really, you're just sort of tap dancing around everything, and so then they never really get a clear picture of what's going on. So yesterday I sat down and I wrote up the backstory of, like, the complete backstory of the ship and everything that happened with the survivors of the ship, and how you actually wrote up how you get off of the ship, and started making some concrete decisions about what are the things that they need to do. They need to heal a bunch of NPCs. They need to deal with Xanathar. They need to potentially deal with the repercussions of the time dilation. They need to find a sacred vessel for Basharla, right? Like all of these types of elements. Like what are our dangling plot hooks? Now, how do I address those in the last 4 sessions? What scenes or what actual things did they need to do? And I went through and I kind of like plotted. I literally like got out a huge piece of paper and I divided it in 4, and I put little pieces of the story that need to be resolved, or steps that they need to take in order to resolve a piece of the story, because some things are multi-step things, right? Getting off the ship is probably not going to be a one-step solution. Oh, we get into the airlock and just go back. Not that cut and dried, right? So I put all of the different steps onto little Post-it notes and put them basically into cylinders. And so those are my puzzle pieces, right? It's almost like plot radar, but it's more action of scenes rather than story elements that need to be resolved, right? Put all those things on the board, and that was how I decided to structure last night's session. Well, I made a bunch of notes about like who they're going to encounter, how they're going to get information. Last night was really essentially supposed to be an info dump for most of the session. And that's why you didn't see more combat-oriented things in the tip ladder, right? If I had known they were going to fight the Froghemoth, like actually fight the Froghemoth, I would have included a bunch of different things about maybe how the Froghemoth is unlocked, or something about the Froghemoth's lair, or something like that, right? But in this case, I didn't anticipate that.
Right.
Now, what that means is I was strongly considering having, as we talked about on Tuesday, some sort of chase scene or pursuit or something like that, with featuring the Froghemoth. But essentially, we sort of had that scene last night, right? So now I can take that piece off my schedule, because it actually got moved up, and I need to move a different piece over to session number 2 of 4, right? I don't really recommend this as a method that you apply if you're going to do a whole big, ginormous campaign, right? Like from the start, and go, okay, now here we are somewhere in session like 9, that you're going to find this thing and this thing and this thing. Like, I don't think you should rigidly plot it out that far. But I'm a fan of island design, and you can go out and Google island design for D&D or RPGs, and you'll get an idea of what it is. But it's essentially you put a bunch of elements on the table in kind of like in each session, or a bunch of clues that you realize interconnect somehow, and you let the players find their way through it, rather than very proscriptively setting a path forth. And this is the order in which you need to discover these things. But so at the beginning of a campaign, for a big stretch of an arc, I don't recommend putting these puzzle pieces in place. But now that we're down to the last 4, it enables me to do 2 things. One is I can move things around, and I have a sense of, okay, time management. How do I manage these elements into a session, right? The other thing that it does is, much like Plot Radar, it gives me insight into areas where I can edit things. All right, this Froggy Moth chase thing was cool last night. I think the players had a really great time getting themselves into trouble. Is it still going to be cool next session or 2 sessions from now or whatever? It could be cool 2 sessions from now with the Froggy Moth makes an appearance and comes back as, you know, kind of like the T-Rex wild card element, right? But I definitely don't want to include it in my next session because that's a little too, I think you're starting to repeat yourself a little in too close proximity, right?
Sure.
So not only does it give me an idea of, okay, here's the puzzle pieces that I need to move around and juggle as my window of play starts to close, but also it gives me insight into where can I do some selective edits and cutting so that we're going to play this next session with focus on these elements, and in session 3, if there's an opportunity for the Froggy Moth to come back, I'll be open to that when I start planning session 3, but I also know, I can cut that if I'm, I have found in our 3-hour sessions that we can generally get through 3 scenes, 3 things. And I think I was over-optimistic last night in terms of, I knew we had the combat at the beginning. I kind of front-loaded the reward for the gifts, so I had a strong suspicion that was going to happen. And then I was like, okay, then the third one will be this big info dump session, and instead it turned into, let's get into this big combat, and then also a little bit of fruitless exploration, right? They got to where they needed to go, but the stuff that they found along the way was not particularly useful or interesting. So, I think it goes back to your comment at the top about the DM's plans were thwarted. And it really is taking that attitude of the logical plot that you have constructed and the logical series of events that you have anticipated the party will follow is really very rarely the actual progress or series of events that they will choose to follow.
Sure.
And that's okay as long as they're having fun and you're having fun responding to them and you can juggle those pieces around. I can plug and play these different elements that I have scoped out into my framework so that they'll go, oh, okay, yeah, it still makes sense at the end when we get to the end. And that's part of my job as the DM, is not to plan out the path that the party is going to take, but to adjust the bricks in the path as they're walking.
Yeah.
So that's I don't know, how revelatory that is, but that's my little take on the plot, the party, and the puzzle pieces. I think the other thing, BSB here, I'll get to your question in a moment. The other thing that's prompted by this is I've been kind of like checking in with the Adventure Zone, and I happen to get on like their Reddit forum this morning, and it just reminded me like why I hate Reddit, because those people just complain about everything, And it's funny because on the one hand, like they complain about all the railroading that happens, and then on the other hand, I think if it was just free form and like a whole bunch of goofs, people would be like, well, this is great, but where's it going? Like nobody's ever, like the people who are happy are never chiming in, right? They're just buying the merch and tweeting about it, and then the people who are unhappy go on Reddit and like complain about it. Yeah. But I think it's that whole thing of like what's railroading versus what's truly letting the party kind of have their reins. And I think it's appropriate to do both. And first of all, it's an entirely different thing when you're trying to do like a 4-episode podcast. Like you have to recognize like, oh well, they just totally were short-circuited on the story and all their agency was taken away. Like there's times where you got to do that if you're trying to get this story wrapped in 4 episodes. We're looking at 3 episodes that are left. Theoretically, they could go explore any part of the ship.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let them do that. Right? I'm not going to let them do that. I do not have a degree in behavioral economics. I wish. You did miss the micro-leveling discussion, but you can go back on the VOD. We talk about it for about 15, 20 minutes. It's a healthy discussion.
Pretty much, I just want to point out, every topic today, you had 4 topics, every topic took about 15 minutes to cover. So if you're going back through the VOD...
I'm a professional, Dom.
You're going back through the VOD, just take it in 15-minute chunks.
These are all sort of like, little mini topics. I don't have a big, I'm going to hold a lecture. There's certainly been days where I'm like, I'm not taking your questions because I'm holding fourth court here, but today's not necessarily one of those. Today's more of quick hits, little quick hits based on either things that came up, like what I was thinking about this morning, or reflections on the way things went last night. Because just to reiterate, last night went off the rails in terms of what I had planned, but it was still, at least in my interpretation, a very solid and successful session. This is the size large Jack in the Box cup. I wanted a large Diet Coke. I got one. I hate to say I prefer McDonald's, but the Jack in the Box stuff is not. It just happens to be near my house. BSB Care, I wanted to answer one of your questions here. Did I have anything else that I wanted to say about railroading? It's such a big topic that I probably do, but. It's a dance that's based around your time management. And I think what happens in this whole railroading discussion that really bothers me is that there are people who complain about taking the player's agency away and how it's just like a storytelling kind of like hack job and it's just an audiobook that we're like following along, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't realize that this is not your home D&D campaign that very rarely has a set end date and just kind of like wanders on, and meanders aimlessly. Like in my own personal home game, we started a campaign 3 years ago to play Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. We just finished session 3 last Saturday. And now we had started from level 1, so we hadn't started in the Barrier Peaks. We had done a whole bunch of other adventuring along the way to get built up to Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. Yeah. But 3 years ago, I started out with the intention of we're going to get to this module and we're going to play it. That's the goal of the campaign. In my home game, I don't have a set fixed date. So I think on the one hand, people look through that sort of lens of well, you're not letting the players do what they want. It's yeah, but you also have to obey the idea that there is a set end date. Right. I also think campaigns could benefit from having a set end date. Rob Donahue talked about this on Twitter and talked about kind of the genius of Shadow of the Demon Lord, which is there are 10 levels. At the end of every session, you level up, which means there are only 10 levels and 10 sessions, and then it's over. And he's the idea that you're guaranteed a fixed progression through your character, but also that there is a set end date for that character to be done and over with and the campaign is finished, or the characters retire and move on to something else or whatever it is also, I think, very valuable. And we've talked about before how one of the biggest challenges facing D&D is the scheduling component of getting the same group of people together week in, week out, or month in, month out, whatever it is, to keep playing through this. You want to, I think the platonic ideal of a D&D game is that you play this campaign that lasts, from level 1, we played from level 1 to level 20. That's sort of the way that it's presented, right? I don't know that that is socially feasible for most groups or actually satisfying play experience for most groups.
Right.
One of the things that we've talked about as we're looking at the end of this particular campaign arc is, well, what if we were to reboot the game into a different chapter of the Iron Keep Chronicles and we would keep the world and the backstory and the things that we've established, but now we'd introduce a whole new party who would be attacking, a different set of issues and whatnot, right? And part of that calculus, if we do decide to do that, is for me, yes, there are only going to be 7th level characters, but do I want to keep fighting my way up that skill, that escalating hill of once they get to be level 10, they're going to be, like superhero kind of status and whatnot. Like, do I want to keep fighting that? The combats only get bigger and more complicated and tougher and more items to track. Or do I want to go back to level 1 and play through that sweet spot of 1 to 8 or whatever it is? I mean, also, you could consider starting the game at 5 and play till 10 or something like that. But the idea that it's the same set of skills as a dungeon master, that you start at level 1 with a level 1 group and you apply it to a level 20 group, I think is a fallacy. It's really not taught well enough that you need to start bringing an entirely different set of challenges and monsters and obstacles and tools and you get tools out of your toolbox that are completely different for a level 16 campaign versus a level 3 campaign. And there's ways where people try to dumb it down, but I don't think we present new DMs with the realities of what a tough job that is.
Right.
All right. I mean, I don't get me wrong. Like, if you can do it, right? If you can pull it off, like Soulbound and whatnot, I think that's great. Good for you. I think, in my personal experience, throughout most of my adult gaming career, I have had campaigns that go up to about level 12 or 14, and then they peak out. The power is so extraordinary of what they can actually do with a 14th level character that the game just naturally sort of reaches its own like climax and conclusion. On the other hand, I think it's like Kevin Culp ran this epic D&D game that went on for a decade or something like that. If you can do it, great. I don't think we should be presenting it as the norm. And that's what I think kind of is implicitly cooked into the rule books is, look, you can play all the way up to level 20. How many people actually do that? BSB Care, I ignored your earlier question.
Was the elevator underwater part of the module or something you came up with?
So I will tell you that basically everything that happened last night is taken directly out of the module with a little bit of tailoring and jimmying to it. But yeah, that's all good. But the elevator thing is, I believe, is in there. It's either an elevator or it's supposed to be a spiral staircase that you just keep going down, and you go down into the depths of the shaft, and then there's the observation room. I don't have the module with me. There's the observation room. There's the diving room with a door, and there might not be anything else. And I just decided that the elevator made sense to me. Of we get to the observation room, and then do we just let anybody go down into the diving area and have access to the tank? No, that would probably be monitored. So what would we have to do that? We'd probably have a gold key card that would kind of cordon off that area. And so then one level would go to the diving tours excursion area, and then the final level would go down to the bioengineering research lab, which is down there, for reasons yet to be explored. But the elevator, I guess it's in there, or I guess I put it in there, but I don't think it's significantly different from anything. I think one of the reasons I put it in there is I sort of shortchanged them on using the elevators between the different levels. They haven't really used those at all. So I wanted to include that element in some way, shape, or form. I just didn't want to have the weird handhold, anti-gravity kind of stuff. So that was a little bit of a custom tailor job, but But the idea that the Froghemoth is in the tank, I think it's far more interesting that he's swimming around the bottom of this thing. It's so deep, right? Like if you look at the cross section in the module has a page that gives a cross section of like how deep this thing is. If you look at it, it's so incredibly deep. I think it's far more interesting for it to be a monster that's like just lurking around in the bottom than it is like something that just comes off the shore and attacks you right away. It depends upon what your circumstances are with your party, but I wanted them to. I wanted them to see the kind of get a hint or a clue about the Froghemoth, like maybe like peer through the glass and make a really good perception check or whatever, and happen to see like the form, the dark outline of this blurry thing going through the bottom that you couldn't really make out what it was, trailing some weird tentacles or whatever. I didn't expect them to encounter it, but what I wanted to do was foreshadow that later on that chase pursuit team where remember that monster thing that you saw? Guess what? It comes back. Yeah, I did go back and watch the VOD and like, listen, I was sitting next to Havana when she was having her reaction to what's going on. Soliban, thanks for the bits. Very, very, very much appreciated. And thank you for supporting us. I was sitting next to her while this was all going on, so I'm pretty aware. But as I said, what made that such a great moment was they got themselves into it, and it was not a moment that was inflicted upon. I think in a lot of ways, them starting the crap with the Froghemoth was probably more satisfying than them, I don't know, swimming around in the tank and all of a sudden the thing comes up behind them. Mm-hmm. Like that can be scary or whatever, but I think the idea that they knew that they had done something stupid and took a risk and had to pay a price for it just makes it. It's like in Dungeon World, right? So the great thing about Dungeon World is the DM doesn't have to roll dice. Why is that so great? Because whenever a failure or a complication is introduced, it's introduced in response to a bad result that a player has rolled. And just that simple act of moving the mechanics from, okay, the monster, it rolls a natural 20 and hits you for 34 points of damage, to, I rolled a 6. Okay, you momentarily trip on one of the cobblestones and the monster sees this advantage and whacks you right in the chest for 12 points of damage or whatever it is.
112.
Well, you can't do 112 in Dungeon World. You'll kill everybody.
Oh well.
But just the simple act of the switch in mechanics of moving that from the DM's purview over to the player's purview creates a situation where the players feel responsibility for the consequences that happen to them. And because they have that buy-in of, God, if I just rolled better, which doesn't make any logical sense, right? The fact that the players can roll crappy or the DM can roll good is mathematically largely the exact same thing, right? But the fact that it's all on their shoulders, they are, honestly, sometimes they're a little let down if they get away with something where it was like, wait a minute, I rolled a 5. Like, that's the worst thing that happens to me? Yeah, for now. Okay, I'll accept that. But just the psychological aspect of giving them ownership over the consequences that occur dramatically enhances their ability, like reduces their willingness to fight back on stuff. Oh, wait, well, why does that happen? Well, we were swimming, we said we were swimming stealthily. How did this thing see us? Okay, well, he has, sonar vision or whatever. It's like, then they're just mad. But if they rolled a 5 on the dice, you see 3 eyeballs pop up and look at you. Oh yeah, we probably do. And that was the situation last night. They had gotten themselves into that trouble.
Right.
So it was it was it was great watching her, and I didn't feel bad about like you spend your turn laughing at this weird blurp 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 bubbles that go up. It honestly, as I visualize it in my head, it is funny as hell. And Grayson totally had it coming, you know, where he's like, well, I'm not bumping this, and I'm not going to re-roll this. Well, I got a dirty 20, and she's like, I got a 27. Like it was the perfect reward for the hubris of that moment of like, oh, I had this coming too.
Sure.
You know, and he stumbles backwards and then, whoa. So I was cutting them some slack on using the gas grenades underwater and whatnot.
Oh, fog cloud too, right?
Well, yeah, I thought that I felt a little bit more justified in negotiating, right? Because he had said, well, you know, wind dissipates it and whatnot. And I'm like, well, I'll let it work for a round, but then it's going to be absorbed into the water. And then he said, well, what if I use a second level spell? And I felt like, okay, that's a good counter offer. Let me put some parameters around it. And then on top of it, I knew he's just going to swim out of it anyhow. So, like, cut a deal with the player, right?
Yeah.
And that was part of what was going on with the grenades last night was, yes, she had to throw them with disadvantage because she was underwater. And she got some really good rolls out of it through re-rolls and bumps and whatnot. But on top of it, as I said earlier, I'm looking for ways to condense combat. And if their idea of dropping depth charges on this thing is the way that they're going to damage it, I would like to give them opportunities to succeed on that, rather than trying to invent some DM ex machina where an alarm goes off and the thing goes and it swims away or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? And also, there's one other piece of the play experience that you have to keep in mind here, right? Which is, if I give her the opportunity to succeed with that gas grenade, I know that this thing literally has a beastly Constitution saving throw. And I know that it's a DC 15 to save against this thing. So I know that it takes a 5 or less. There's literally only a 25% chance that this thing is going to fail this thing. But that puts drama on the table. That die roll suddenly becomes incredibly important. And because I roll in the open, the players are now invested in, oh, okay, well, let's see what happens. Bam, hits the table. They care about that result. They may not necessarily know that it has a 75% chance of succeeding, but even if they did, it still creates a moment of suspense, and it gets the players focused on like, oh, this could be the linchpin to the whole encounter. This could be how we save the paladin who we've accidentally totally gotten in over his head, like literally gotten in over his head, right? The other thing is that gas grenade is built around a sleep spell, and so when the creature's knocked out, unless you disturb it or attack it, it's out for a full minute, right? And that's a little bit different than like an ongoing poison effect where every round it gets to save to try and recover or whatever. When it's used against the players, it's a total dick move. The players are like, well, can I roll to save? It's like, no, you're asleep. Yeah, but like, isn't it like a poison? Well, apparently not.
Yeah.
I swear we've used one against them, and it was just that nobody at the table decided to use their action to wake that person up. I thought when we got in the fight with the security robots, they had used the sleep gas grenades against them.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But maybe not. So yes, it was, I don't know. You know, like on the one hand, you could say, oh, it was really softballing the players to let them use a gas grenade against this thing underwater. It was, logically, that shouldn't have worked. Yes, but the alternative is to grind out more hit points against a massively more powerful foe who's probably going to kill a character and have that end in a moment of probably fairly somber defeat, even if they succeed against the thing. They're gonna have to, like, I don't really picture how Grayson gets out of that unless he cuts his way out, which he maybe could have done. But that's the alternative, is prolonging the fight versus creating this moment of drama and allowing her to put the whole encounter on the knife's edge of a die roll. So, yeah, and she realized like 5d6 was like not gonna do much against this thing that had 180 hit points. Okay, you got its attention.
Yeah.
Well, shit. So it was not something that I had planned. It was not something that was anticipated or assumed was like an arrow in their quiver. But it is one of those things where if you're looking at an eye of like, how do we condense this combat? If this is not the showcase for the evening, even though it was arguably like a showcase encounter, and that's maybe one of the lessons here is a showcase encounter doesn't have to go on for 7 or 10 rounds. It can be over in 3. If you're always looking for opportunities to hand out, either escalate the stakes or hand out a defeat, then all of a sudden your combats start to come into focus, right? They start to get more tension and drama attached to them, as opposed to the war of attrition of who's going to hit 0 hit points first. All right, that was a lot to talk about. Like, I felt good going into the show, and then it took a totally different direction. But the thing about having as many pieces of the puzzle on the board as I had when I walked in the room was that I felt good about where it was going, even though it was going completely off the rails.
Yeah.
So it's funny how having that sort of stuff in your hip pocket can really make you like much more at ease and much more agile in responding to what's happening at the table. Mm-hmm. We'll see if that continues to play out over our remaining 3 sessions. Yeah. But
let's see.
There we are. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for your participation. This has been Disorganized Play. We're going to be back on Tuesday to plan session 2 of 4 or 1 of 3 remaining. I don't know how you want to think about that. In the meantime, tonight we're dark. Nothing else going on here on the Saving Throw Show. That's all fine. On Friday, we got another installment of Wild Cards, our Deadlands Reloaded game. So tune in for that. Saturday is nothing. Sunday is
Roll for Shoes.
Roll for Shoes. Who's DMing that?
Jordan Caves Calaman.
Jordan Caves Calaman. Are there any notable guests in the show?
We're still working on names, but Megan Caves will be playing.
Oh, okay. I'm familiar. She's played in one of my games.
Yeah. You might remember her. Benjamin Dunn.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Ben Dunn. Very good.
That's it right now.
All right. Very good. It's Easter.
And April Fool's Day.
And it's Easter and April Fool's Day. Ugh, yeah.
I can think of tons of great pranks for that.
Guys, Jesus is back from the dead.
Oh, see, I was not going to say anything.
Oh, okay. Sure, I said it. You're look.
That
I'm
guy.
a Reformed Catholic boy, and Reformed by what I mean by Reformed is left the church. Also, I do want to mention that Evil Hat just launched a brand new Kickstarter this morning. I do some social media for Evil Hat, so this may be a conflict of interest. I'm just going to get that out front, that I do promo stuff for them. But if you are so interested in if you play the Coup or the Resistance or One Night Revolution, which is sort of like a sci-fi version of One Night Werewolf and whatnot, they have a full RPG version of the game based in that world that uses the Fate system and some of the stuff that has been created, I believe, around the Dresden Files Accelerated. But it's a new version it's a custom-tailored version of the utopian world or dystopian world. And that's a Kickstarter that went out this morning, and it's funded. And if you are inclined to so back, please go do that. So that's out there. The nice thing is, if you back, no matter what level you back at, you get a preview draft of the book of the complete rules. It's just missing some art that hasn't been completed yet, and it's missing some. A little bit of proofing and whatnot to go in the final production. But it's called Uprising, and you can check that out on Kickstarter. So that's the Buzz and Looney. Yeah, thanks so much to BSB Care and Flockwad and all of our mods who help keep the channel safe, friendly, clean, and accessible. We had a great discussion. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and those of you who donated bits, really appreciate that. Always a great discussion. Thanks to Harold. Thanks to Harold, who's still asleep.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Until next time, let's dungeon! Lapsed Catholics represent.